Welcome back to the Stationary Dev, and today we have I guess you could call it a summary video or a top 5 video for 2022. Today we're going to be looking at my most used fountain pen inks for 2022. So these are not necessarily my favorite inks or my top inks, although some of them might actually make that list. And they're also not my most used of all time. So these are only the inks that I've actually used the most over this past year. So I figured I'd show them, put a swatch down, and we'll count down to my most used ink for 2022. And I'll kind of explain as I go. So coming in at number 5, this will be my top 5 most used inks that I've used this year. So coming at number 5 is actually Rohrer Klingner Kastanienbraun, or maroon, if you want to call it that. This was a ink that I got a while ago. I think I got it in 2020 actually. But it was a limited edition ink. Every year Rohrer Klingner does a limited edition color. And this was their limited edition color for 2019, as you can see there. I like their limited editions. They come in these little tubes, recyclable tubes. And yeah, they're great inks. Rohrer Klingner inks are great inks. They're affordable. You can get them for about, $11, $12 off of Amazon or whatever. But this one obviously might have cost a little bit more. I don't remember how much it cost. You can't get it anymore, unfortunately. It's sold out, but it's the point of the limited edition. And then you got your normal Rohrer Klingner bottle there. Like I said, they're great inks. This one, of course, brown inks are some of my favorites to use. And this was just a nice brown ink. And I just like the idea of a limited edition brown ink. It's a solid performer. I've used this one in a number of pens. And I don't know, I keep coming back to it. It's interesting enough, just interesting enough for me to want to keep coming back to. So let's put it down on paper so you can see what I'm talking about. And it's a lovely sort of reddish, kind of chestnut brown, hazelnut brown, whatever you want to call it. And it goes down pretty wet. So this is my 5th most used ink for 2022. So I used it a fair bit. Like I said, I just kind of kept coming back to it. There's no sheen or anything really that I know of. Shading is not the greatest shading, but it's just a good, reliable, interesting color. And you can see it go down there. It's a unique shade, I think, at least among my collection. Now I'm gonna label these just so we can keep them straight, or you can keep them straight. I don't pay attention to what I'm actually labeling them with. This ink is actually Iroshizuku Shinkai, so not any of thing on this list, but we have Rohrer Klingner Kastanienbraun. And this is, I guess I'm put number 5 there, just so we can keep it straight. So moving right along to number 4. This one is a favorite amongst many, and that is Diamine Oxblood. You can see I've used probably, I don't know, a third of this bottle. This is a smaller 30 milliliter bottles. But Diamine Oxblood, one of my favorite red inks. If I'm going to use like a reddish shade, I usually sort of reach for this one. So that's why it makes the list. And yeah, I actually prefer Oxblood to the Writer's Blood. Because the Writer's Blood has a little bit too much like magenta-y or like pinky shades. I think this is this one kind of leans more toward brown. So surprise, surprise, but leans a little bit more of like a brownish or like a true red, but just a true dark red. So that's why I like it. And it's a usable shade. You can use it in any situation. It's not too bright or crazy. You can use it for business. You can use it for notes. You can use it in a journal. Whatever you use fountain pen inks for, this is a good one for it. But I'm sure Writer's Blood is good too. But this is just what I prefer. And that's a lovely shade. But you can see kind of how this is a reddish brown, and then also how this is kind of a brownish red, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, with those two inks next to each other. So if I'm feeling something businessy that I can use in a lot of different situations, but also kind of interesting enough and different enough for my usual like blues and stuff, this is the one I go for. So this is number 4, Diamine Oxblood. Absolutely beautiful ink. It's super wet, super saturated. Never had a problem with Diamine Oxblood before. So moving right along on to number 3, another Diamine. Diamine kind of took over this list a little bit, but Diamine Prussian Blue I actually used a lot this year. And this ink, you can't kind of see, but this is almost about the same as my Oxblood. It comes down to about there-ish. So I guess about a third of this bottle used as well. Maybe a little bit more. Just a solid blue-black ink that I've absolutely fell in love with. If I'm using a blue-black ink, I know I got Shinkai here, but which I also love. But if I'm reaching just for, if I want a blue-black ink in my rotation, I'm just, by default, I'm reaching for Prussian Blue. It's that good of an ink, and you'll see it's got gorgeous shading. It's got like just enough interest. I don't know what color it is or what shade it is, but it's just got enough interesting about it that it sets it apart from other blue blacks for me. And I don't know what it is. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's just a beautiful, calming shade with a lovely, like it's a true blue black because it has that gray sort of tone to it. It has like blue and black in it. Sometimes people call inks blue black that are really just dark blues, or sometimes, you know, companies will even do that. But this is a true blue black, and it's just got gorgeous shading there. And you'll see that come through as that dries. But it's just interesting enough for me to make my sort of, like I said, if I want something sort of businessy, everyday ink, but still interesting, something that, you know, my friends can try or whatever, Prussian Blue is just a solid choice. It's super reliable, of course, being Diamine. All right, we're on to the top 2, and they are good ones. So I've used both of these a lot. Coming in at number 2, oh, actually, let me label this one before we move on. So I have Diamine Prussian Blue. All right, so back to the list on number 2. What is it going to be? And it's Diamine, again, Tobacco Sunburst. Now, in terms of brown inks, Tobacco Sunburst, the name is out there, the ink is out there. I don't know if it makes a lot of people's sort of top list, or I don't know how like familiar people are with Tobacco Sunburst. It is an ink from Diamine's Guitar series, so they have like Tobacco Sunburst, Desert Burst, Cherry Sunburst, Pelham Blue, those colors, and they're all really great colors. Honey Burst, I think, is another one. But this one, I just knew I had to have it. I like the name, so the tobacco sort of color, that tobacco word is sort of, I guess, I don't know, it brings an image to mind. I like that. I also, obviously, I have a big bottle of this one, so you know I kind of thought I was going to like it, and I do. But yeah, but I think this one needs more awareness than it has, but people know about it. But I think it's absolutely a stunner. If you like brown inks, or maybe even if you don't like brown inks, but you want to try a brown ink that is pretty interesting and different enough to set it apart from just like a basic brown, give Tobacco Sunburst a go. You can see I've used a decent amount of this bottle as well, and it's always sort of up there. This is, I said this wasn't a list of my favorites, but this is definitely my favorite brown ink that I have. So let's get it out on the paper. And you'll see how interesting it is. It's an interesting shade of brown. It has a ton of shading. And here we go. So Tobacco Sunburst. In my mind, or to my eye, it is a yellowy brown, lot of shading, and also sort of has like a green tinge to it as well, which I think is really evocative of that tobacco name, because tobacco is, you know, a green plant that gets oxidized and sometimes flavored and all that kind of stuff. So it has that kind of look to it. Diamine Tobacco Sunburst, and you'll see as that dry, the ink just comes alive, absolutely comes alive. Kind of goldish color, but I think it's definitely brown. So my second most used, and you might say if this is your favorite brown, and it's only your second most used ink, what is the first? And there's an interesting story for that. It's Diamine Tobacco Sunburst, number 2. All right, so comes to the final ink for my top 5 most used inks that I used this past year. And then number 1, the most used ink the ink that I used the most this year is a Monteverde ink, and it is actually Monteverde Sapphire. So, interesting reason why I use this ink. It's not my favorite ink. In fact, I have some qualms about this ink, but I've used a lot of it. This bottle is more than halfway drained. It's more than halfway used. The year before last, so in 2021, my goal was to, and I'll talk while I swatch this, but my goal was to use up a bottle of ink. And so what I did to sort of accomplish that is I basically picked an ink, or picked 2 inks. Actually, I picked 2 inks to use. And I would always have a pen inked with those 2 inks. Every single week, I would have a pen inked with those two inks all the time. And then if I wanted a variety, another ink that was a different color than those 2 inks, I could ink one more pen, and that would sort of max out how many pens and inks I use at the time. So I'd have 3 pens inked, one with each of those 2 colors that I picked to try to use up a bottle, and then one with another ink that I just wanted to use, maybe a seasonal color or whatever. And it worked. I used up 2 bottles of ink, smaller bottles, but I used up 2 bottles of ink, and I tried to do the same thing. I decided to try to do the same thing at the beginning of 2022. And so for 2021, I kind of used the inks that were kind of my favorites at the time. And for 2022, I decided to try to use up an ink that I don't use a whole lot. It's still a pretty color, and I will still enjoy using it, and it can be used in a lot of different situations. But it's not my favorite ink. I don't really care if I use it up and don't buy it again. And so that ink that I chose was Monteverde Sapphire. So probably for the first more than half of the year, this was always in a pen of mine. And then just sort of as the year ended and I just sort of kind of got disinterested in it, I started mixing in other inks, and now I don't have a pen inked with this at the moment. But what I can say is it is a really gorgeous shade of blue. It is a really nice blue. I think they were kind of going for the Parker Penman sort of sapphire-y blue ink there. And it does have some sheen. It is a very wet ink. But my qualm with it comes in the fact that it smears horribly. Maybe not as bad as something like a super sheener would. Oh, this is not a Diamine, I already messed that up. Monteverde. It doesn't smear as much as maybe a super sheener would, like Organic Studio Nitrogen or a Sheen Machine from KWZ or something like that. But it does smear in pretty much every paper that I've used it with, except for like maybe copy paper or something super absorbent like that. But it does smear a lot, and I absolutely hate inks that smear. It gets on my last nerve. So if you just have a little bit of, I don't know, condensation or something on your hand, and you flipping through the pages and it smears, a word or two of your inks, I hate that. So that's kind of what led me away from it. Plus the fact that it's just kind of a basic blue. I don't mind that, but I just kind of went down to using 1 or 2 pens at a time, and I wanted something a little bit different than just a regular blue. But it is a good ink if you don't mind the occasional smearing, or you're using a type of paper where maybe it won't smear. It's a good ink. But I was trying to use it up was the idea. So I got about halfway done and then kind of paused that. So let's go back and review, and I'll kind of show closer up views of each of these. So number 5, Rohrer Klingner Kastanienbraun, and you can see it does have a little bit of shading to it. It's a reddish brown ink. It's showing a little bit of sort of greenish sheen, greenish black sheen, but that really doesn't come out in writing very much. But just a solid, interesting brown. Oxblood, of course, is going to be amazing as it is. There's a little bit of goldish sheen you're kind of seeing there. But like I said, it usually doesn't come out in writing, maybe every once in a while, depending on the paper. This is, by the way, this is Tomoe River 68 GSM, the old stock paper, in case you were wondering. So you're going to see some sheen that you probably might not regularly see. And then number 3, we're getting into the good stuff. You see Prussian blue just explodes, just like the one underneath it, which we'll get to here in a minute. But that Prussian blue, absolutely a stunner of an ink. And there, like I said, there's just something interesting about it that keeps me coming back to it. And then my favorite brown, you can see Diamine Tobacco Sunburst there. Still kind of drying over there, no sheen or anything, but it is a super shader and goes from like a darker sort of brown there and then lightens up even to yellow over here on this side. So stunner there. And then last but not least, my most used ink, or the ink that I used the most for 2022, is Monteverde Sapphire. It is a very vivid, very deep blue. If you're looking for an alternative to something like a Bay State blue or something like that, you might check out Monteverde Sapphire. It is vivid. It has a little bit of, I guess, bronzish sheen you can see around the edges there, and sometimes that does come out in writing, but not a whole lot. But there you have it. So those are my top 5 inks, my top 5 most used inks that I use the most in 2022. So if you would, leave a comment below and let me know what your most used inks for this year have been. Maybe you only use a couple of different inks, but let me know. I'm interested to see what people are using, especially what people are using a lot of. Have you emptied an ink bottle, recently, and what ink is that? Also, if you like the videos, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's a quick and easy way to help out the channel. It's completely free and doesn't do anything to you other than let you know when I release new videos. So please do that if you can. And other than that, thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you all soon.